Hey everybody, this is a video where I'm going to be asking some ranging in prevalence questions about the new Star Wars trilogy. It's funny as I plan to do 5 questions mostly about The Force Awakens, but after The Rise of Skywalker came out, I got 5 new questions, and so now we can do this about the entire sequel trilogy now that it's over. And to me, that feels more fair anyway, because there was time to answer all these questions, but they didn't do that. So now I get to make this video and get those sick views. My first question is, when did Palpatine have a child? Not so much that I'm worried about how he survived the explosion of the Death Star, because I've seen theories and Legends lore that the Palpatine that we know from the original 6 movies is a clone, and the real Palpatine was the one that we saw in Exegol that's been, hermetized because of his years of use in the dark side of the Force. So that's fine, that's great, whatever. But when did the clone of Palpatine have a child? And if that's the case, can a clone have a child? Because if not, then that would have meant that the real Palpatine would have had to have a child. However, we know because of Anakin Skywalker that you don't have to bump uglies to make a child in Star Wars. You can manipulate the midichlorians, I hate that word, but you can manipulate the Force in a person's body to form a human child. It takes great mastery of the Force, but it can be done. Palpatine has great mastery of the Force, so it's not unbelievable that he could do such a thing. And honestly, it's the only way I can think of that he could have a grandchild, and Vader could have a grandchild, and they would be comparable in age whatsoever. So if that's the case, when did this happen, and why did this happen? Because if he wanted to continue his legacy, he could have just made a new clone. I don't understand. I think an Emperor Palpatine returning thing is a little bit more intimidating than some junker girl from Jakku is now the Empress of the Final Order. So that's a question that comes up, but doesn't really get answered. Next is, why is Luke the only person to continue the Jedi Order after the fall of the Empire? It sounds obvious, right? Like he's the only Jedi. No, he's not, though. Because of all these shows and games and books and stuff that take place in between episodes 3 and 4, we know Obi-Wan and Yoda were not the only Jedi to escape the Order. So, if there's all these other Jedi out there, like Terran Malicos before he turned bad, or Cal Kestis, or Ezra Bridger, or whoever trained him, I can't remember the guy's name, but if there's all these Jedi just floating throughout the galaxy, I mean, even now Ahsoka Tano is on the list because she didn't get killed by Vader like we thought she did. How come after episode 6, when it was safe to be a Jedi again, they didn't take on their own disciples? And you could ask, well, how do you know they didn't take on their own disciples? Because they never showed up anywhere. At no point, when the First Order had taken back control of the galaxy, did these other Jedi from these other corners of the galaxy ever show up. They never came in to help, so they clearly either weren't thought about or didn't exist. And if they didn't exist, then how come all these other Jedi that survived the Order 66 didn't train new Jedi? Were they scared? What were they scared of? What possible reason could they have to not try to revive their own order? Maybe, like Obi-Wan, they lost faith in it at some point. Well, Obi-Wan didn't really lose faith. Luke is the one that lost faith. I'm sorry. My mistake. I love Obi-Wan. That's my father. But moving on. Next question is, why is there a resistance? Easy. They were resisting the First Order. But as the title crawl in The Force Awakens says, I have to read past something. The sinister First Order has risen from the ashes of the Empire. Also, it starts, Luke Skywalker has vanished. In his absence, the sinister First Order has risen from the ashes of the Empire. Okay. So, since Luke has gone missing, the First Order has been a rising threat, a developing presence in the galaxy. They're not in control of the galaxy like the Empire was. They're not the government like the Empire was. They're a faction of what remains of the Empire, and they are slowly building power. Why is there a resistance? The Republic is still the commanding force in the galaxy. They're still the government. There's no reason for them to have a resistance. A military, sure. A military force for the Republic makes a lot of sense. But the Republic and the Resistance are established to be two different things. As you can tell in The Last Jedi, when the Resistance calls on the Republic for help and they don't show up. But Leia being high up in the Republic and being a general in the Resistance should link the two in some way. The Republic should feel obligated to help the Resistance because of Leia, but they don't. The Republic never really comes to help the Resistance, and I know, right? We'll get to that later, but it's weird to me that the Resistance, A, exists, and B, never gets any help from the Republic. I don't understand. Like, they can't be resisting the First Order until they take control. The rebellion, the Rebel Alliance, was not the Rebel Alliance before the Galactic Empire existed. They were not rebelling against the Senate. You know what I mean? I think you know what I mean. Next up is, when did the First Order actually start? Now, I know it sounds like I answered this in the last one and I'm just padding to make the video longer, but trust me, I've got a lot more questions. This video is getting mid-rolls anyway. What I'm really asking is, if it says that it started rising from the ashes of the Empire after Luke Skywalker went missing, which I would have to assume Luke Skywalker went missing maybe as long ago as 10 years ago. Possibly. Is 10 years enough time for everything that we see? Is 10 years enough time to hollow Ilum into the Starkiller base? Is 10 years enough time to build the Supremacy and the Dreadnought? Is 10 years enough time to fully staff the First Order the way that we see it? Is 10 years enough time to capture children, and condition them into adulthood where they become loyal stormtroopers? I don't think so. I don't really think it is. Because if they're saying that they steal these stormtroopers while they're children, that would have had to have been forever ago. So the First Order would have had to always exist. Like, after the fall of the Empire, there was a little bit left. It's like in real life, after the Nazi regime fell, there were still a lot of people out there trying to keep the fight going. So maybe that's the same thing that happened with the Empire. There were just factions that were trying to keep it alive, and they eventually converged and started rebuilding the Empire by repeating the processes of the Galactic Empire to build the First Order. Sure, but that's headcanon. I shouldn't have to make that up. That should be explained somewhere in a data book, or in a novel, or in a game, somewhere. If you can't fit it in the movie, fit it into the lore somehow. I have not seen a single thing that talks about what I'm asking. Also, I guess, since I haven't really... Well, you know, I'll get to that separately. I do want to talk about something else in relation to the conditioning of the stormtroopers. But I guess what I'm just asking here is, like, how long has the First Order really been around? Because if you think about Episode 9, Palpatine has a whole different order. He has the final order. It's not connected to the Galactic Empire. It's not connected to the First Order. He's been doing all of this separately over the last 36 years. How did all that happen? Next up is, what's up with the Knights of Ren? We're led to believe that after Ben turned from the light side of the Force to go join Supreme Leader Snoke, join what exactly? There clearly wasn't a First Order yet, but it's like the call from Snoke was too strong, and he just, what was Snoke, just chilling in a chair in space somewhere like Thanos? Anyway, he apparently, while he was like training in the dark side, he gained command of this squad called the Knights of Ren. I don't really know what makes him leader. Apparently they already existed, but they follow this religion, something about Ren. I don't remember exactly, but all of these people are apparently dark side sensitive Force users. I don't know where they came from. The thing about the dark side of the Force is you can't have that many users. I've talked about this in my Jedi Fallen Order review. You can't have too many people drawing from the dark side of the Force because it makes each one weaker. That's why there is a rule of 2 when it comes to the Sith. Now, since the only Sith in the sequel trilogy is Palpatine, maybe that's the loophole. Maybe that's the the fine print that they didn't get around to talking about. But the fact of the matter is, there's too many people drawing from the dark side of the Force for anything that we see to make sense. How can Kylo Ren be that strong in the Force if there's 8 other people drawing from the dark side of the Force? Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. You would think Palpatine would be smarter than that. You would think he would abide by his own rule of 2. Next up is, why was Finn a janitor? FN2187. According to the data books, Finn was like the most proficient in stormtrooper training. He was really good. He was really effective, like with his aim. He was a good marksman. He was really good with melee weapons. He was just a really effective soldier. So why was he a sanitations expert on Starkiller Base? Why was the first scene that we see on Jakku his first mission? Like, you would think that as soon as he graduates and becomes a stormtrooper, you send him right out because he's so good, right? Or maybe they wanted to preserve him. They didn't want him to die in the battlefield because he's so good, and that's why they had to protect him with a broomstick or something. Also, if he was janitor on Starkiller Base, he could not have been janitor on the Dreadnought. I'm sorry, not the Dreadnought, the Supremacy. That's like saying, hey, I did security at the White House and the Pentagon at the same fucking time. Like, no, you didn't. Like, you clearly weren't even in the First Order for very long. You're still young. You're like 22. So I would assume that you were taking it like maybe 5 years old. You've been training most of that time. How, maybe he was a janitor while he was training. But at the same time, it seems like they had just gotten Starkiller Base finished when they started using it. So it's like, no, maybe they were just sitting on it. Maybe they were just sitting on it until they could get access to the map to Luke Skywalker, so they could start doing stuff, and then they could go after Luke, and that would be that. Next is, what happened to the Galactic Republic? I know in Episode 7, the Hosnian system gets blown up. Was that the whole Republic? Clearly not, because in the next movie, which takes place a couple of days later, the Resistance is expecting to get help from the Republic. They expect somebody from the Republic to show up and bail them out. So clearly they know something we don't. They know that there's more Republic out there somewhere. Where did they go? Why did they, bow down to the First Order? The First Order had their biggest weapon eliminated. They're not that much of a threat right now. You can use the Resistance to take out the First Order if you come up with a plan, but they didn't do that. The Republic just goes up and into the ether, and they don't show up again. I don't really understand. Like, what happened to them? I guess that's a smaller one, but still, like, what happened to the Republic? Next is, where do the bad guys get all these weapons? I know that they took the entire planet of Ilum and turned it into Starkiller Base, right? But the Dreadnought and the Supremacy, right? They're pretty big deals, right? The Dreadnought is a fleet killer. The Supremacy is like, I guess it's a fleet killer. But then it gets more ridiculous when you get to Episode 9, and there is an entire fleet of Star Destroyers with Death Star cannons. How on... Well, I shouldn't say on Earth. How on Coruscant do you get all of these materials? Where do you get these supplies from? Where do you get these Kyber crystals from for this fleet of Star Destroyers? Maybe they're synthetic. Maybe. But the thing about synthetic crystals is they are still real crystals. You just have to force it until it cracks and bleeds. And then it becomes red. So it's not like grown in a factory, something like that. Unless maybe it is. I think, like, at some point in the movie they mentioned that, like, he conjured these Star Destroyers. So maybe with his... he was just creating them with the dark side of the Force, and maybe that took a huge toll on his body. Maybe that's why he looks the way he does in this movie. But I would still like some sort of explanation as to where they got all this shit from, because it just feels like it's being called in. Like, they got kill streaks, and they hit 4, and boom, care package with a fleet of Star Destroyers with Death Star cannons. That's as good as an explanation as any, right? Especially since we don't have one. Next is leadership in the First Order. It seems in Episode 7 that it goes Snoke, Kylo Ren, and Hux, even though I thought Hux was above Kylo Ren because they have, like, a check and balance type system. But When Snoke dies, Kylo Ren becomes Supreme Leader. But Kylo Ren does not seem too terribly interested in actually running the First Order, so he delegates his responsibilities. That's fine. But in Episode 9, Hux is like taking orders from other people and reporting to this one guy. And I'm like, hold on, isn't he a general? Like, isn't he super high ranking in the First Order? He called the attack to destroy the Hydian system in Episode 7. What is going on? Why is he taking orders? Now, since we're talking about leadership in the First Order, I wanted to do a different question about this, but the next one is too important. So, Snoke, right? What was Snoke's plan for Rey? Because he's like, oh, if the girl is as powerful as you say she is, bring her to me. Because, okay. She's seen the map. They're going to use what she knows to fucking, like, go to Ahch-To and kill Luke, right? That seems like it's the general idea. But it's like, bring Kylo Ren to me, we will complete his training. His training never gets completed. So I think that the main idea was to have him kill Rey. But why? Why do you assume that they have some sort of emotional connection just because he read her mind and they fought? Like, does he know something that we don't? Anyway, where was I? Does he know something that we don't? Because what he really does is he just calls her there and tortures her, and then orders her death. So she has nothing to offer Snoke, to offer the First Order as far as information goes, because in the second movie, she's been to his planet, so you would think that she would want to extract the information on where he is from her head before killing her, but no, he does no such thing. He just decides she has to die. So Snoke is like the most inept goon I've ever seen in a Star Wars movie, and it hurts my feelings, but that's just the way that it is. Lastly, what's up with all these crazy new Force powers? Like, I'm not against new Force powers existing. Like, Force Slow in Fallen Order is pretty cool because it's not something that breaks all the lore. His ability to sense memories and objects makes sense. It seems like it would be a Jedi ability. But what is a dyad in the Force? How is it possible that two people have a connection, an emotional connection, especially Kylo Ren and Rey? They really don't have that. But how is it possible that the connection in the Force is so strong that it's a completely different force? Like, you can draw on it to give yourself life energy. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. As well as, what is with this, like, Force Skype that they have? Like, that, I really don't get that either. Because, first of all, the fact that they can even Skype like that is weird. Because people have been able to communicate across the galaxy with the Force since Episode 4. That's fine. But, as far as being able to see where the other person is, I don't get that. And they're like in this like isolated space. And the more they do it, the stronger their connection gets, which I understand. That's why matter can teleport across now. But even that is very jarring to see. When he snatches her beads off, I was like, what? Did you just reach across space-time, dude? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But, as well, on top of that, we have the Force healing, right? Force healing someone else is something that we haven't really seen before. It's not that it's impossible, not that it's wildly hard to believe, but the fact that Rey just knows this without actually doing any training. And at the end of the movie, they have this like Dragon Ball Z moment, you know, like in the Broly movie where they give Goku the last little bit of their energy and it gives him the extra push he needs to defeat Broly. All the Jedi basically do that for Rey. They just go, here you go. Which, again, someone who's gone into the Force guiding someone that's still alive is not new. In Episode 4, Obi-Wan says, use the Force, Luke. And Luke uses the Force and shoots into the thermal exhaust port. But he doesn't actively give Luke strength. Or at least if he does, that's not communicated. But that's just something that we have to roll with now. Also, on the topic of Jedi being in the Force, from what I remember and from what I understand, Qui-Gon taught Yoda how to merge with the Force upon death, right? And then Yoda taught Obi-Wan. And I would be okay with Anakin knowing how to do it strictly because he's made from the Force, so maybe when somebody like him dies, it's a special case, and he just default returns to the Force. That's fine. As far as I know, Mace Windu didn't know how to do that. Ahsoka Tano didn't know how to do that. I don't even know why she's dead. What? Who got Ahsoka? Who got Ahsoka? But Kylo Ren sure as hell wouldn't know how to do that. Why would Luke or Leia know how to do that? Dying and merging with the Force are not the same thing, because all the other Jedi and the Jedi Council didn't know how to do it, because we would have seen Mace Windu, Kit Fisto, Plo Koon, all the Coyote Mundi as Force ghosts at some point in the saga, but we never do. And I have to assume it's because they don't know how to do it. You think Shak Ti and Ayla Secura know how to merge into the Force? No. So why does Luke know how? Maybe it's from all his studying. Sure. Did he teach Leia? Because if Leia was so afraid of her own death, why would he teach her how to do that? And who taught Kylo Ren? I don't think Luke would teach Kylo Ren how to merge into the Force until he becomes a master, right? I feel like that's one of the prerequisites. You have to be a master to unlock that ability. Kylo Ren was still a Padawan, right? So I don't get that. But yeah, just all these wacky, crazy new Force powers. Rey uses Sith lightning without any study in the dark side of the Force, which is kind of stupid because it's not a level 1 ability. Palpatine and Count Dooku were the only canon users of Sith lightning before now. Look how fucking old they are. It took them decades of study in the Force to unlock that ability. There's theories that Vader could have done it if he had organic hands. You know what? Snoke did it too, but Snoke was built by Palpatine to take his place or some shit like that. But even then, even without that, Snoke still looks like he's a fucking 150 years old. He says he saw the Galactic Empire rise and fall. He's been around for a while. So sure, a lot of time studying the Force, he understands how to use Sith lightning. Rey has used the Force 3 times by this point. How does she just by accident? My accident? There's no fucking way. And lastly, in regards to that whole thing, in episode 8, Snoke is darkness rises and light to meet it, or something like that. So apparently there's always supposed to be at least one dark side user and one light side user to balance the Force out, because otherwise it's just dominant on the light side, and there is no balance. That's why it was so important that Kylo Ren and Rey both existed. But Kylo Ren don't exist no more. Rey is the only apt Force user in the galaxy that we know of, so it's just light side dominant again. So what happened to the new rules we got about balance? Do they not matter anymore? That's what I really just want to know. Do they not matter anymore? Because that's fine if they don't, but it's just say that, Well, actually that was wrong, so no. I don't know. But those are some questions I had about Star Wars over the course of this new trilogy. I hope that... I'm sure this isn't the first type of video about that you may have seen or come across, but I really hope that the questions I put forth here stand out. Because a lot of these are questions I've had for a long time. And some of these are relatively new questions. But I am a critical thinker when it comes to films and stuff like this. So I would like to think that I was among the first people to come up with these particular types of questions. Not all of them, but some of them. So, I will see you in the future, and may the Force be with you.